Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is Educational Podcasting Today, episode number 54, the podcast that helps you learn how to bring audio and video into your classroom. If you guys have that podcasting bug, this is a great place for you guys to be. Don't forget to check out all the great resources that we have over at educationalpodcasting.com. And of course, if you're looking to do something in your classroom, head on over to podcastingwithstudents.com. We got some great things going on as we head into the brand new school year, and I have a fantastic guest today. He is a podcaster and one of the hosts of a fantastic show called the OnEducation podcast. I want to bring on my good friend, Mr. Mike Washburn. Mike, how are you today? Welcome to the show.
Fantastic. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am so happy to have you here. We've, of course, been talking a lot this summer and talking all about podcasting. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about about your show.
So my name is Mike. I'm from Barrie, Ontario, Canada. One of the hosts of OnEducation. The other host is Glen Irvin. He's in Minnesota, Sauk Rapids, I believe, Minnesota. So we got together and met a couple years ago and kind of just started doing this podcast in March 2018, I guess, is when we started. And, we talk about pretty much everything. We don't have a whole lot of limitations on what we get into. Our wheelhouse, so to speak, I guess, would be kind of games-based learning and gamification, video game design, coding, programming, those kinds of things, instructional coaching, instructional technology. But we've definitely gotten into things like policy and politics. We think those things are important as well. We kind of cover everything. We're a pretty well-rounded podcast.
You guys certainly have a great setup, and we're going to get into all the things about how do you do it, what's your website. We're going to talk a little bit about ISTE, but first we want to know what you guys are up to this year as the school year is getting started. We know that many teachers out there are looking to find the best ways to bring audio and video into your classroom, and I want to share with you guys some of the great things that's going on. I know that Mike knows this. I know that you guys might be aware of this, but Apple has recently changed the way that teachers can find other educational podcasts. Mike, were you aware that Apple has done drastically different things to their podcasting algorithms and their categories recently?
Well, I knew that they changed the categories, and I think that my categories specifically were fine, like where I had put on education. So I was kind of following it. I know that some educational podcasts had been kind of shuffled out of old categories, maybe causing a bit of consternation. But I guess one of the other benefits of this is a chance to give some of these folks a bit of a reset.
Absolutely.
on where they are, and that's not a bad thing.
And so Apple basically over the last few days, maybe a few weeks or so, have been going through some changes over on Apple Podcasts. They no longer have some of our favorite educational categories. They used to have a category called Education Training. They used to even have a category called Education and K-12. And these were the categories where most teachers were finding our teacher-based podcasts. And that is no longer a case. So, Mike, there is a great place that teachers can go right now to find podcasts created by teachers for teachers, all about teachers. And I want to remind you guys that there is a fantastic site called the Educational Podcasting Database, and you guys can go to educationpodcastingdatabase.com to find over 140 educators that are out there creating shows just like Mike, just like myself, just like some of your favorite podcasters out there. Check it out over at the educationalpodcastdirectory.com and find over 140 brand new educators that you can subscribe to, and we have links to their subscribe buttons, their websites, and all that great stuff over at educationalpodcastdirectory.com. And Mike, I got to tell you, there's a lot of great things that are happening these days in educational podcasting. You guys are certainly one of them. Tell us a little bit about your show. How'd you guys get started, and how'd you meet your co-hosts?
So Glenn and I met through Schoology. So Schoology is a learning management system. They're one of the bigger learning management systems, and both Glenn used Schoology and I used Schoology in Canada, and we both became Schoology ambassadors. Glenn a couple years prior to me being one, but we met at their annual conference, Schoology Next 2017. We met. He was doing sessions. I was just there to learn more about Schoology and how we could use it better at the school I was at the time. And I introduced myself to him, and I was already into games-based learning and gamification, which was the session that he was doing. So I told him a little bit about myself, and we committed to, I followed him on Twitter and he followed back, and we connected on Schoology. There's a way you can connect with each other there. And we just kind of talked back and forth for the next few months after that conference in the summer. And then sometime in the middle, sometime a few months later, I suppose, I kind of suggested to him through the Schoology messaging system that I was looking to do a podcast. And I just had this kind of weird gut feeling that he might be. I didn't want to do it alone. I didn't want to do a podcast solo. I wanted to have a partner. So I said, I think that you might be the dude to do this with. And we didn't really know each other. And Glenn actually admits that he didn't really know a whole lot about podcasting, and hadn't really listened to many or any at all prior to me approaching him with this idea. He was about to go through a bit of a job transition, so he kind of asked me to put the idea on ice a little bit through the Christmas time 2017 into 2018. But then in January, I was right back on him, and I said, listen, I think we got to do this. I just have this feeling. And we just, he said yes. And, we started planning. We started working on kind of how we would do it. We talked on the phone a couple times, and then we just kind of went for it. And we released our first episode in March 2018. We got some help from Schoology financially, which was actually a huge thing for us. They sponsored our podcast without ever hearing a single episode of the podcast. It was we can't thank them enough. They're no longer a sponsor of OnEducation, but they definitely, we wouldn't be as successful as we are now without what they did for us to start. The gear, like we're on camera, the gear that you're looking at, the very expensive microphone and boom arm, and we bought laptops and a bunch of other equipment that we kind of needed to get doing this professionally and in a level of quality that we could both be proud of. Schoology really helped us do that. So the rest after that, March 2018 is history.
That is an amazing, amazing story. And if you're looking for all the great information, you can, of course, go over to OnEducationPodcast.com. Now, before we get into the how do you record things and stuff, I got to ask you, you've been doing this now for about a year and a half almost.
Yeah.
What have you learned? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about podcasting over that last little bit as you look back and go, my goodness, we've done X number of episodes?
Yeah.
What are some of those lessons that you guys have learned?
We're pushing our 85th episode now. So we've done a lot in the last year and a half. I tell people pretty frequently that it's easy to do a podcast. It's something everyone should try. It's really hard to do a really good podcast. There's a difference between talking on your phone into the mic on the phone and slamming that out on Anchor, and that's a good thing. I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that, and I'll bless and support, and even beyond. I had someone ask me to be on her podcast just the other day, and I was at a conference, and she was just on her phone, and she just pointed the phone at me and asked me a question, and I answered. And then literally a couple hours later, it was out on Anchor. And, I was like, God bless you. That's, if you want to get your voice out there, then you should go ahead and do that. But doing and Jeff, you would know this, and a lot of the other folks that we talk to would know that doing a professional level, almost like studio quality podcast is incredibly hard. I probably put in 15 to 20 hours a week, and I have a full-time job, like I have a day job. So and to be honest, at the start when we were doing this, I was putting in way more hours than that. I was pushing, 30, 40, sometimes 45 hours a week to get started. So, doing a really good podcast is very hard work, and it takes a lot of passion. You have to want it super bad.
Well, what is a good podcast? I mean, we talk about this a lot in our groups, and is it just good content? I mean, if you go to a conference, like, we were both at ISTE, right? And for some of us, we had different approaches this year. You guys had an entirely amazing setup, and I had a chance to look at to meet Glenn and talk to him a little bit and see what you guys were doing. Awesome stuff. On the other hand, I was the guy that was running around the fields a little bit with just a single microphone, doing social interviews and taking stuff for live on the spot interviews. What is a good podcast? Is it all about equipment? Is it all about your guest? Is it all about content? Because look, I'm just like you. I'm sitting here going, how many hours a week do we spend doing this?
Yeah.
Does it matter if you spend 10 minutes editing a show or 10 hours editing a show? Content is content, right?
Content is content, and you have to come with, a thought and an opinion, a perspective that people are interested in hearing and reflecting on and resonating with. You have to, like, for us, one of the things that people tell us is that Glenn and I have really good chemistry with each other, even though we have very similar views on education, but we're totally very different people. So the chemistry thing is always a little bit weird to hear, but it works. And so there's something there. And that's kind of part of the part of the interesting nature of that origin story between Glenn and I that makes it weird, is that I didn't really know Glenn and he didn't know me, but it's found itself to work really, really well. And I think that there are, production quality was a thing that I was really big on when we started. I refused to put something out that had low production quality. So I was playing Glenn, or I was telling Glenn, go listen to this podcast, go listen to The Daily by the New York Times, go listen to, there's elements a little bit of maybe some Pod Save America stuff in our podcast. There's some elements of The Weeds by Vox in our podcast.
What do you mean by that? Is that are you putting in intros? Are you putting in audio clips in between like when you say there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that? Talk to us about how are those things influencing your? Is it influencing your topics, your recording, your editing? What does all that mean?
So, we wanted to not be afraid to talk about policy, especially when we quickly realized that our views kind of politically aligned even kind of better than maybe we could have even imagined. I would never put a label on what Glenn is. I always joke that I'm practically a socialist is what I always joke. I'm not, but I joke about that all the time. I'm fairly left leaning, and Glenn is too. But so we definitely get into politics, and we're not afraid to be aggressive about what we think and what we share about our political opinions. But as far as technical elements, so things like both in the 538 Politics podcast and in The Weeds, they do a cold open at the start of their show, where it's usually funny. It's usually some sort of outtake or a joke that gets put in right at the top. So we have a cold open, for example, in our show, and we try to find kind of the funniest. It's usually me, the funniest or dumbest thing that one of us has said, and that goes in what's called the cold open. And then one of the other things that we wanted to have, and this I got this kind of thought from something like the Weeds, is really rad opening music. So if you listen to OnEducation, we have wicked music. All of the music underneath our sponsors ads, and the opening music is awesome. It's catchy. It's something you like to hear when you turn it on. I find that there's podcasts that I've listened to where, you hear the music and you are instantly almost turned off the podcast before someone even opens their mouth. And so part of the aesthetic appeal is production quality. You have to bring, if you're doing, again, if you're meaning to do a really high production quality podcast where you're willing to, again, put in like that giant amount of effort to do something that's almost studio level quality, these are, I think, some of the things that matter for sure.
So talk to us a little bit about the dynamic. You said that you had the idea, Glenn didn't really understand the concept. So many of us are out there trying to come up with ways to really do those buddy shows, or, like a few weeks ago we had somebody on and it was, two people and they love podcasting in their cars and they have a very simple setup here. Tell us a little bit about how you guys divide the work. Cause I know a lot of people are asking questions like, all right, if I'm alone, how much work is it? If I have a co-host, is it half the work? Is it not half the work?
Gotcha.
How do you guys divvy up all the stuff that goes into making the show a success?
So I do a lot of the business aspect, because our podcast does have sponsors, and there is we would call it a business. We are making money or trying to make money. The money goes towards letting us go to conferences and travel and stuff like that, so we don't pay for that stuff out of pocket. So I handle a lot of that. I handle a lot of the guest acquisition. So reaching out to people, lining them up, scheduling them, liaising with them when I need to make changes and stuff like that. Glenn's primary role, other than being actually on the podcast, and our outline work is definitely 50-50. So we both work on the outline progressively throughout the week. We record on a Sunday. So we usually make a copy of the previous week's outline on Monday or Tuesday, and then we delete out the old stuff and we just start pumping in new stuff. And as the week goes on, we continue to add things, and the outline takes its shape right up until Sunday morning before we do our recording on Sunday afternoon. So the outline is 50-50, and then Glenn does most if not all of the editing. He's on a bit of a 2-week holiday, so I've been doing, thank God I actually have editing skills as well, because I've been doing the editing last week, and the episode that is literally going to come out almost as soon as we're done talking here this afternoon or this evening. But Glenn does, and Glenn's a fantastic editor. He does a great job, and there is definitely a quality difference between the episode last week and the one that's about to come out, and what will happen after that when Glenn gets back to save my ass, because he's a much better editor than I am, and he does all of that. So he does the editing work, and I do. And work on the outline, and I do kind of the business side and the guests.
So let's talk a little nerd stuff here. What's your editing application of choice?
Glenn edits in Audacity. So he uses Audacity to do all of his editing. It's a free, audio editing software. It's fairly popular and well used. I've, when he kind of had to send me a template this week for him being away, I downloaded Audacity and I opened up the template, and I can kind of just continue on where he left off, which is great. Nice. We've used GarageBand a little bit, And I believe that when we actually originally we hired an engineer at the very start. So this is actually a little bit of a funny story. When we did an episode 0, as most studio kind of quality podcasts have done, they do like a beta episode that no one has heard. So there's about 15-20 people who have heard our infamous episode 0. The content is great, but we got tons of feedback that the quality of the editing was garbage, and that was me editing, so I'll take full responsibility for that. But the first thing we realized was that we needed to hire someone to edit for us. So we went and sought out someone and paid them every month to edit our podcast. And we did that for about a year. And we took back the editing responsibility kind of, I think, just after FETC. So in kind of February 2019, we took back the audio editing responsibility. We wanted to have more control over the time that it came out. For example, like if we really wanted to get it out on a Monday after recording on Sunday, Glenn could put his nose down and get it done, kind of thing, right? But also getting rid of a lot of the ums and the lip smacks and stuff like that. Our engineer wasn't doing a lot of that work for us, and we wanted to make it a little bit cleaner. So we had Glenn take back that responsibility, and he's done an amazing job. But yeah, he does the editing in Audacity.
I think that's a great story, and something I highly recommend to any new podcaster. Look, if you don't have the time and you can find somebody who does a great job, I think that's fantastic. I always recommend for new podcasters, go back and try to edit your own stuff. It's really the best way to not only listen to what you've done, but really learn about your tells, your habits. You get better when you listen to your shows. And I do all my editing here. I know you guys do your editing. It's always great to go back and be able to say, okay, what can I do differently on my intro, on my outros? How am I asking questions? Am I listening? Am I talking over my guests? Even if you have somebody editing it that week, I still suggest try doing your own edit of a show, just to listen back to your show and see where things are. It certainly is a skill that I think all podcasters need to pick up every now and then. Being
Self-reflective is a super important thing for a lot of things in life, but I found that as I've listened to the podcast episodes that we've done, I've gotten better at the things that I knew I was doing poorly. Like, for example, talking over Glenn. And I didn't think this was going to be the case, but I am the more aggressive of the two of us when it comes to talking and speaking and, being passionate or, verbose even on the podcast. And so I had to, find space, or I don't know how to phrase it, but I wanted Glenn's voice to be stronger in the podcast, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing what I could to give him the space to say the things that he wanted and needed to say. So I've been trying really hard to get better at that. I have definitely gotten better at the ums and ands and uhs and stuff like that. That happens when you listen to your very first couple podcasts. You realize how often you say and do those things. And I do them a lot still now, but imagine I was doing them way more than even now then. And I've gotten better at catching myself from doing those filler noises that you tend to hear and get omitted, usually edited out of most podcasts.
I think one thing that we can take away from is the art of listening to each other, not only as co-hosts, but also as your guests. And, usually with a co-host, it's like, okay, are you a tag team or are you two singles competitors on the same ring at the same time? And you've seen it work one way and you've seen it work another way. And sometimes I know, like when I'm working with some of my co-hosts, you kind of realize, okay, is the show going okay? Who's going to step up to make it interesting and to keep the conversations going? And those are things that you kind of have to work on as you go through with everything. Yeah. What advice do you have for anybody that's out there listening to this on working with your co-host during a recording?
During a recording.
During the recording. There's the hard one.
Like I said, I try to give my answers or my thoughts a little more succinctly than I did in the past, so that Glenn has space. He feels like he has the time without us, belaboring on a point or on a topic. If we've spent 5 minutes talking about something and I spend, 4.5 of that talking about something, and he only has 30 seconds, well, that's not cool in any aspect. So I definitely want, and I try to give what I'm saying, and I'm the one that is very poor at this, so I'm working on it, and I don't always nail it, but I'm trying hard to be conscious of how much time I'm occupying on a topic, so that Glenn can weigh in, because Glenn is awesome, and I want Glenn's thoughts out there just as strongly as mine. He's passionate and he's incredible, and he's very, very smart, and comes at things in ways that are a little bit different than me. And I want those, all of that to be out there. So I'm trying hard, and Glenn will even admit I don't nail this every time, but I am actively reflecting on it. So I guess the short answer, which I did not give you, was give people space if you're working as a partner, to be to provide the answers that they need to provide, or the context that they need to provide as well.
Today we're talking to OnEducation podcaster Mike Washburn about all things podcasting and audio and video. I got to ask you, is education from the Canadian border any different than what you see education or educators in the American border? I know you have a chance to come into the country a lot. Boy. You go to different stuff. I'm asking you this because you see so many different things happening on social media, and I want to get into some of these topics if you're able to, but
yeah.
We've had a lot of stuff. So I'm going to start the conversation here with, from the Canadian border, how are you seeing the status of education? How are you seeing what's happening in American education these days?
Oh, how much time do you have, Jeff? This is a loaded friggin' question.
I know.
We talk a lot about this on the podcast, and it's not good, Jeff. Jeff, it's not good, man. It's rough, and I'm having a hard time talking about it without getting angry about it. And we're trying to keep our rating not with swearing, and I'm not, I haven't sworn yet on the podcast, but oh buddy, I come close sometimes, and it's almost always when I'm talking about the difference between the education system in Canada and the education system in the United States. And I'm not telling you that education in Canada is perfect, and certainly we're having some struggles right now with some of the people that we've elected recently. But let me tell you that when you have an education secretary who's just completely inept at not only her job, but understanding anything about education at all, when you start there and start at the top, and you're already kind of, in a bad spot, it can't get a whole lot better. I'll tell you one thing, though. Thank God for educators that are passionate and capable, and, just in spite of Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos, and having no money for pencils and friggin' pens and markers and Amazon wish lists and all of this other garbage. Despite all that, we have teachers out there that are just absolutely crushing it in the classroom and doing amazing things. And it's astonishing to me what people do. Someone said, I thought there was an amazing take the other day. I had commented about Amazon wish lists, being disgraceful, not the teachers being disgraceful, just the idea that you had to have them to begin with being completely awful. And someone said, in the absence of, these supplies, we actually might see an opportunity for teachers to do innovative, interesting, incredible things. And I think that you are seeing that every day in the classroom when you have, teachers who are really struggling to supply for their kids the things that they need. You get an opportunity to do really interesting work in the classroom.
Now, you mentioned some of our edu leaders in this space here in this country. We've been having some conversations, and hope we can get into some of these topics here in the time that we have remaining. I don't want to go deep dive, but let's just talk about this. We've kind of started having not just the edu leaders, but the social edu police.
Oh,
and
boy.
I wanted to get your opinion on this, and I'm only asking you this because it says here that you have a podcast about teachers, teaching, and everything in between. And over the last couple weeks, we've had a lot of the in between, where teachers have turned into that edu police. And, you're somebody who puts out a ton of content. You've got a high visibility, and you put out some pretty interesting and controversial stuff. And there's a lot of other content creators that are out there. And, I've come across this myself too, where you see a topic, you want to discuss it, but should you? You see a topic and maybe somebody brings something up and you have to ask, should I keep that in the show? Should I isolate that and actually use that audio video clip to my advantage to promote the show? And we're in a few different conversations right now in various social spaces, and I wanted to get your opinion on this as a content creator, as a podcaster. Do you push, let me start with these conversations. Do you push towards those topics, or do you react from those topics?
About a year ago, maybe a little bit less than a year ago, I really sat down and thought about how I wanted to be perceived online. I knew that my profile was growing kind of exponentially. I'm adding almost 650 to 700 Twitter followers a month right now, which is a huge number. And so I knew that I had to spend at least a little bit of time thinking about how I wanted me as a person. How is Mike Washburn perceived? And it came down to this, that I just wanted to be exactly who I am, no matter in what space you interact with me. So the way that you and I are talking here right now is the exact same way I would talk to you if we were talking in person, and is exactly the way I talk on my podcast. And I would put every single sentence that I've said, that I've talked with you tonight, on Twitter as well. I'm not afraid of doing that. And listen, if I lose followers because of that, well, they probably weren't following me, because of me to begin with, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So I've decided just to be myself, and it's the easiest thing to be. I don't have to lie. I don't have to fake. I don't have to be anything but exactly who I am with the opinions that I have. And I don't need people to agree with me. In fact, I would love, I'm not going to say I would love, but I don't mind people who disagree with me. And I enjoy a good debate just as much as, the next guy. So, and it's funny when I get into things on the podcast and I start saying things that are a little bit nuts, and Glenn starts laughing, and I'm like, well, dude, tell me I'm wrong. I'm like, just come at me. If you have a problem with what I'm saying, at me on Twitter, and I'll go at it with you, because I'm fine with it.
But where's the line here? And let me see if I can rephrase this just a little bit. Well,
because I know that there's a lot of, this is happening on Twitter right now.
Well, okay. Here's the question. How do you see yourself? How should I see myself? How should we as educational podcasters see ourselves? I'll give you kind of two lines here, and I'd love to debate this one a little bit. Are we teachers with hobbies, or are we educational news reporters? And a teacher with a hobby is doing a show about whatever their topic happens to be, and that's great. Whereas an educational news reporter says, I see something, I want that guy on my show, so that way he brings his thing with him, and now my show is going to get more ranking because I have that controversy on my show and I'm trying to exploit it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just not sure that I like either of those definitions.
How would you say it?
I'm definitely not a teacher with a hobby. This is more than a hobby. There are a lot of podcasts that are hobbies. OnEducation is not a hobby. It is more than that now, even, I think, and it's stay with us, folks, because it's going to be even more than a hobby in a couple of years. So teacher with a hobby, I'm not a fan of. We do report the news. I don't consider myself a journalist. I don't have the credentials. I don't have the training, and I think that journalists are people with education. I wouldn't want someone who read about homeschooling and now teaches their kid at home to call themselves an educator. So I won't call myself a journalist. So I think I haven't really thought about how I define myself in this space, other than that. I don't mind being called a content creator. I definitely think I do that. I am absolutely an educator. So I don't teach in a classroom anymore, but I'm my day job, I'm head of curriculum and training for a company called Logix Academy. I train teachers all across North America on how to use robots in their classroom. I am absolutely an educator. So I'm not sure what definition I land on, but I don't know if I land on either of the two that you said, even though I do a little bit of all of that stuff. I think that why don't we just call ourselves educational podcasters, and then podcasting be whatever it is to whoever is doing it in the time that they're doing it. It can be everything. That's what's great about podcasting. It can be whatever you want it to be. You can report the news, or you can speak about controversy and topics that are a little fringe or out there, or get into policy and politics, and you can just be a hardcore, hi, welcome to so-and-so, let's talk to so-and-so, and then just get right into an interview. There are tons of educational podcasts that literally say hi and then just, I'm with so-and-so, and they just start talking to them, and it's basically an interview show. So that's what's great about podcasting, man.
I completely agree with that, and I like the idea, and it's something that I echo too, of can't we just be having a good time? Can't we do this for our enjoyment? Can't we do this to share our opinions and share our joy and love of doing this types of medium? I gotta ask, Mike, as we go through a brand new school year coming up, I'm looking forward to some new adventures. I know you're looking forward to some new adventures. Or I should say, put it this way, what advice do you have for any educator out there that's looking to get into podcasting this year, whether it be in their classrooms or whether it be something like what we're doing in our studios? What advice do you have for anybody that's just like, I want to try this? How does it work?
Similar to the advice that Glenn and I give people when they want to ask us about, we get asked about it a lot with games-based learning, video games in the classroom, stuff like that. That's because that's kind of our thing, is just start doing it. So, if you don't be afraid. You're not going to break anything. You're not going to hurt anybody. You're not going to, ruin your classroom. Just go and do it. Even if you start small, start with recording, talking to your kids as, anecdotal notes. Use even something like Notability or GoSynth or something where even like voice memos. If you want to just get your kids used to talking to you out loud on a medium that gets recorded, just go and start recording your kids talking to you about what's going on in their learning, and then start to ramp it up. Use something like Soundtrap to put music into it, and then have longer, more meaningful conversations with your students about what they're learning in their classroom. But you don't have to start with you do not need massive amounts of equipment like you and I have to do this. You can literally use the iPads that you have in your classroom, or your Chromebooks, or your, whatever. You can use your phone. If you're allowed to take your phone out of your pocket in your school, go ahead and take your phone out, put on voice memos, and just start recording stuff, and then dump it into GarageBand and go from there, or something like that. But you don't have to start with thousands of dollars in equipment. You just got to start. You just got to start.
Just start creating content and listen to it. Mike, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to seeing all the great stuff that you guys are doing this year. And, please come on back, bring Glenn with you, and let's continue these conversations.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Jeff.
Where can we learn more about the great things that you're doing?
I am at Mr. Washburn on Twitter. The podcast is at OnEducation Pod. The podcast website is oneducationpodcast.com. And I have a personal website. What is it? It's mikewashburn.net. I almost forgot it for a second there. So that's the ways that you can get in touch with me, and I'm very active on Twitter. I do have a pretty, maybe not as large as Jeff's, but I do have a fairly decent sized Twitter following. But I am one of the more active tweeters out there, so I'll definitely engage with you. If you get in touch with me, I'm happy to start conversations with anybody.
And of course, all the links for this and all of our shows are going to be found over at Educational Podcasting today. And you can go to educationalpodcasting.com. This is episode number 54. Talking today to Mike Washburn from the On Education podcast. If you guys are looking to bring stuff into your classrooms today, don't forget to check out our brand new channels, podcastingwithstudents.com, where you can find everything that has to do with audio and video for your classroom. And if you are an educational podcaster, we would love to have you guys be our next guest. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter at Podcasting Today. Reach out to us. Let us know that you guys are out there. This show is dedicated to you guys, the teacher who is creating amazing audio and video, either in your studios or in your classrooms. We would love to have you and love to have you guys on. Well, that certainly wraps up episode number 54 of Educational Podcasting Today. On behalf of Mike and everybody here in the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you guys to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.